Hola, buenas tardes. Gracias por acompañarnos. ¿Quién viene aquí que no está en el Tec? Excelente. Nos da mucho gusto que nos acompañe gente que viene de fuera del campus. Nos encanta hacer actividades que incluyen a toda la comunidad creativa de Monterrey. Así que bienvenidos y estén pendientes de todo lo que estamos haciendo aquí. Y a los alumnos y maestros del Tec también gracias por venir. Hoy tenemos una invitada muy especial. Tenemos a Aushcerman, que viene de Herman Miller en Michigan. Y bueno, I'll guess you'll introduce yourself. Thanks, Amy, for being here at the Tec, and we're excited to have you.
Thanks.
Take it.
Hello. I guess I'll sit. It'll be comfortable. Thank you, Jorge, Diego. My name's Amy Aushcerman. I'm the corporate archivist at Herman Miller, so I'm kind of like the historian, librarian. I'm really lucky that I get to tell all of the amazing stories of the company's 114-year history, and then also work with the designers that we commission now for new products to sort of collect and understand how we might talk about a table that we put out now, 50 years from now. So since you guys can't come to the archives, I thought I'd give you a little virtual tour and kind of explain to you what sort of materials that we've kept over the years that also have gone into a book that we just released called Herman Miller, A Way of Living. But this is the door to my office. I love it. Old school Helvetica right on the front door. And this is one shot of the giant warehouse of design records that I manage. So, like I said, the company's 114 years old, and during that time we've kept everything from records that document the design of products, the marketing, business records, internal communications. Herman Miller has obviously put out a lot of cool, amazing products over the years, but also that comes with that is great graphic design, great marketing, and other sorts of communications that we've kept over the years. This is an Eames LTR. This is like a joke I like to make, but this is a step stool that I use around in my office to get into drawers. But this is an Eames table that also is really useful in a lot of other contexts. Sorry if you guys can't read that. Ooh, this is hard to sit on. So this is an example of some of the types of materials that we have in the archive. So this is a letter from George Nelson, who is Herman Miller's director of design, to DJ Dupree, the founder of Herman Miller. George Nelson was the one that was responsible for bringing the Eameses to Herman Miller and bringing their products into our line. And this is a letter from George where he's saying to the founder, "Dear Dick, I think you will be interested to know that all competition on the Eames furniture has washed out. Their decision now is a choice between Herman Miller and setting up their own plant. Cordially, George." And so with documents like that, so this was the time when we acquired the molded plywood business from a company called Evans. During World War II, the Eameses were perfecting their 3D plywood molding experiments with a project for the US Navy for leg splints. And then they took that technology and put it back into making a chair that is made out of 3D molded plywood. But we've retained patents. This stuff is not only cool to look at and cool to use on things like social media and marketing material, but it's helpful as we continue to make these products and make sure that we're still making them to the specifications. One of my favorite collections that we have in the archive is product development. So there was a guy named Pep Nagelkirk, which is a very funny name. But he was the one responsible on the engineering side with Herman Miller that was helping people like George Nelson and the Eameses, Alexander Girard, bring their products to life from a very technical standpoint. And he was a great archivist, and he kept his files for things that were both made and not made. So this is a project file for a high-backed coconut chair. So if you guys have seen the coconut chair, it's a chair that looks like it's a slice of coconut. And they were kind of thinking, well, maybe we could elevate the back, make it a little bit more loungy. But after some work, it ended up not working. And so they say, this is why the Nelson office isn't doing it. The chair is ugly, it lacks the simplicity and directness of the basic coconut, and looks like an inept modification made by second-rate designers. Number 2, the chair is uncomfortable. This might be corrected by restudy of the upholstery, but this might involve more thousands of hours on our part and on yours. So George Nelson was very funny, and it's interesting to see correspondence like this that kind of now gets lost in emails and Slack messages or text messages. So during the design process, you kind of arrive at decisions in a more expedited manner versus here you're having to send memos back and forth between Michigan and New York, and then it elicited this sort of funny response that now we can look back and laugh at, and also know why we didn't end up doing it, which, sometimes as we're looking at products that were made and distributed in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and maybe if we'd want to bring that back, we can sometimes go back to these files and understand what worked and what didn't. So also a part of the archive, we have a huge film collection. Charles and Ray Eames, definitely towards the end of their career, were prolific filmmakers, and that sort of started through projects with Herman Miller. When they were developing chairs, they were also developing the marketing material, and with that, they thought it might be cool to make films that sort of detailed the production processes or the manufacturing. So the Eames Lounge and Ottoman was introduced in 1956 on a morning show on NBC, and so for that special, they made a film that was a sped-up version of the chair being assembled. Then Herman Miller would retain copies of these films that we'd send out to showrooms so that they could play it or lend it. So we were like a film lending library. Now I've kept them around because film canisters look cool, and we're also working with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. to help preserve master copies of some of these films. So I get our marketing dollars and put them towards restoration of films, and they create master copies that then you can screen later. Jorge, Diego, maybe we can do a film screening here sometime of those. We also have a huge photography collection, so consider all the types of photographs that are made when you're introducing a product. It's not only a white suite, but maybe you're getting the picture in context of people using it in a showroom. And also part of the film collection are photographers that have added great photography to the archive over the years. So Charles and Ray Eames not only were making films, but they were taking pictures constantly. Like, I love to say, if they had Instagram in their time, they would be like super users. They're always shooting. And this is an image of Alexander Girard and his wife Susan in our San Francisco showroom that he designed, but you can just sort of imagine they're like gearing up for this showroom opening, and the Eameses are taking pictures of their friends. And then also you get a sense of the art direction that the Eames office, more notably Ray Eames, was sort of completing at this time. So, it's a picture of chairs, but even the composition, the colors that are used, the fact that Ray has also arranged a nice little bouquet of flowers to include, this sort of elevates the experience beyond just seeing a chair on the page, and it gives you a sense of a color story. So keep in mind, this photo was taken probably in the early 50s, and it's pretty avant-garde for that time. Like, imagine the 50s housewife that's seeing this and being enticed to bring it into their home. Again, with the Eameses, like, they were doing some pretty freaky stuff for their time, and you look at this was a photo shoot that was done to launch the molded plywood furniture line, and even just the composition, it's very abstract. It's, you're seeing all parts of the line of furniture, whether it's a table or a chair, but it's done in this more, I would guess, like graphic, cubist, painterly style versus, again, just like people sitting around a table. I like to show this to our art directors and designers now to sort of inspire them to get weird and have fun with how they present our product, because that's sort of always how we've approached the marketing. We also have a collection of images by a photographer named Ezra Stoller, who during the 40s and the 50s was like the most famous architectural photographer of the time. And so George Nelson, when he was putting together Herman Miller's 1948 catalog, it was to introduce his new line of modern furniture, and he had this notion that the materiality and the art direction and design of the catalog needed to reflect the quality of the furniture, meaning like it needed to be nice, it needed to be really good, it needed to be exciting. And the thought of having Ezra Stoller, who's usually photographing buildings and making them look really cool, like to put him with the Noguchi coffee table, like this looks like a piece of sculpture. It looks really monumental, it's overwhelming. And during his time, architects would sort of joke, like if your project was photographed by Ezra Stoller, it got Stollerized. And so I feel like this is a very Stollerized version of the Noguchi coffee table. There's a new book out about Stoller too, which is amazing. I encourage you to check it out. Some Herman Miller stuff in there. Herman Miller is a super old company, and people work there forever. It's a company town. There was a guy named Jim Eppinger who was our East Coast sales rep from the 30s through the 60s, and he would often go around and visit with some of our designers and would be taking photos. So again, I wish Instagram was around then. But this is Alexander Girard, who is the head of our textile division, in his home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he lived. And he collected folk art from everywhere, lots of folk art from Mexico, Europe, Asia. But I just like this idea that we have these nice, not private, but moments of the designers hanging out in their own spaces. And that's stuff that has been kept in the archive over the years. Same goes for images of sales conferences that we'd have in Michigan. So here's Charles and Ray Eames and Gerard and George Nelson, who loved smoking cigarettes. And then Charles and Ray hanging out in their home in Pacific Palisades in California. I don't know if any of you have been there, but you can go visit. Their house is amazing. So again, I just love thinking about some guy from a little town in West Michigan going to visit the Eameses in their really cool house in LA and just taking pictures of these people. Herman Miller also has, I was saying earlier, like we have this amazing graphic design tradition, and that extends not only to our products and to our customers, but to the people who work at Herman Miller as well. So Herman Miller's first in-house graphic designer was named Steve Frickholm. And one of the first projects that he got on his desk was creating a poster for, we have a company picnic every summer that everybody's invited to. It's free, there's games, carnival, food, whatever. And so Steve decided he wanted to make a poster and entered it into a competition for AIGA and won. And then we ended up printing these posters and handing them out to people who worked at Herman Miller. But now Steve ended up designing 20 more over the years, all in the same sort of blown up, abstracted versions of picnic food. So there's ice cream, there's hot dogs, all sorts of stuff. But those have since, whole collections of those have been put into the collections at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Cooper Hewitt. So now this poster that was made just for people in West Michigan is now in these giant storied design collections across the world. This is a view inside the vault in the archive. So this is sort of a more temperature and humidity controlled space where we keep early versions of products and then also film negatives and other early marketing material, but it just looks cool. If you guys have ever seen or gone to the Vitra Design Museum, this is like my mini Vitra, I wish, but just having chairs up all for everybody to see. This is another view. I have this awesome rolling storage that helps me fit more stuff in. Those flat files have things like drawings, textiles. In here, like I said, we also have earlier furniture pieces. A lot of times I get asked, how do I tell how old my chair is? And sometimes it's just as easy as flipping it over and looking at the label. So I was saying earlier, Herman Miller acquired the molded plywood business and Charles and Ray Eames from a company called Evans. And so this sticker shows that Evans is still making it. It's manufactured by them, and Herman Miller is the distributor. So this means this chair is from between 1947 and 1949 before we acquired the business entirely. We also keep things like tools. So we recently re-released the fiberglass chairs designed by Charles and Ray Eames and make them in a new, more eco-friendly composition. But when we were developing that, our product developers and engineers were able to look at things like old tools to make sure that we were getting all of the exact right measurements. And they look cool. I've lent this to a museum before to put on display. more pictures of boxes to make me look like I'm really organized. And like I said, we have a huge textile collection. So I showed him earlier, but Alexander Girard was the head of Herman Miller's textile division. He was brought on after the Eameses and George Nelson felt like they weren't finding textiles out in the market that were good enough for their cool furniture. And so they brought Girard on, who they'd worked with before at the Museum of Modern Art and other places. And then he ended up designing over 300 textiles for Herman Miller in a multitude of colorways. Herman Miller now owns a company called Maharam, which is a textile company, and they are the producers of Alexander Girard textiles. So when they're in the product development phase and looking at new patterns and colorways to reintroduce, they come to me and I'm able to lend them pieces for development. I hope you can kind of see this, but this is a blown up version or a blown out component view of the Eames Lounge and Ottoman. Again, not only do these look cool, but it really helps our product development and quality control and engineering. I like seeing the marks even from the architecture offices, so see Charles Eames in the notes, revisions that have happened. We also have material from Herman Miller's history where we didn't, like avenues we didn't explore. So towards the late 50s, the residential furniture market sort of plateaued and Herman Miller was looking at getting into new systems-based like businesses. So which ended up turning into office furniture, which a lot of people know Herman Miller as today. But at one point we were looking at livestock identification, so branding the cattle, and then this cool guy in the cowboy hat, I guess, can use his laser goggles and see which cow is which out in the field. Another fun part of my job, there's so many stories to tell. It's really easy to talk about the Eameses, George Nelson, Girard, whatnot. But a lot of people had a hand in creating this amazing legacy, design legacy at Herman Miller. One of those people is named Tomoko Miho. She was a Japanese-American designer that worked for George Nelson's office and she was the one that did a lot of the more iconic catalog and art direction and design. This is our 1964 catalog. So this was sort of the first time that within the furniture industry, the binder was used as a sales tool. And I like to say to the kids now, it's like an app because you could update it as the furniture lines changed or you added something or took it out. But she also just did really amazing art direction. So even taking something like a chair that you sit at school and putting it in stacks and elevating it and making it a little bit more fun. She also did these 1965 catalogs that more just I love because of the color story that she's telling. And again, this is it's to sell furniture, but it's super fun and it sort of takes it beyond what you would expect. We have a huge advertising collection too, like I've kind of said. So George Nelson's office was charged usually with designing at least 2 print ads a month for publications like Arts and Architecture and Interiors. This was an ad for the Noguchi coffee table from a 1949 issue of The New Yorker. So again, I'm lucky that they've kept all of this stuff because it means I have a job, but then also it's really cool to go back and see how these products were being talked about when they were introduced. There's a guy named Irving Harper who worked for George Nelson who did a lot of his more iconic graphic design advertisements. So Irving really liked doing stuff for Herman Miller because he could really do whatever he wanted. He lived in New York, was always going to museums to get inspired, and so this very obviously it's like, oh, he went to the MoMA and went through an African mask exhibit and decided that this might be a cool way to show people all of the options for furniture pulls on George Nelson case goods. So again, he said he liked doing stuff for Miller because he could do whatever he wanted. He could make the furniture as small as possible on the page and nobody would tell him different. I like this as well. This is an advertisement for textiles, but again, it's like very abstract, ripped pieces of paper that's also showing the textile designs. This is very meta. It's like advertisements for advertisements, but on the left, it's an advertisement for an Alexander Girard textile binder that if you were an interior designer or a salesperson, you were encouraged to buy this because it was showing the whole line and it made your job a lot easier. And then on the right, Charles and Ray Eames were also designing elements of showroom, so you could basically buy this and hang it up in your showroom, and it says on here, these help turn prospects into sales. So they're designing sales tools and things to place in the interiors as well. Alexander Girard, I showed him and his wife Susan in our San Francisco showroom earlier, but again, he was not only designing textiles for the company, he was designing interiors, furniture, and then also doing typography for the space as well. So I like showing this because it's a nice example of Girard's typography, as well as this. So there was a sale at the Textile and Object Shop, which was a textile showroom, more or less, that Herman Miller had in New York City. And this was Girard. Imagine getting this in the mail. I'm glad we saved them. So I want to talk a little bit more about how we use the archives at Herman Miller. A few years ago, we acquired a company called Design Within Reach, which is a more consumer-focused retail venture. It's the largest retailer of Herman Miller furniture before we acquired them. And they came to us one day and they said, we need more beds to add to the line. Is there anything from the archive that we might be able to use? And we did have it. It was the George Nelson thin edge bed and day bed. So these are ads, contemporary ads for them. But they came to the archives, asked what we had from a development process. Thankfully, we have all of the drawings, all of the production files, down to the suppliers that we were using, details. And then on the left, this was part of a collection of quick pencil drawings of pieces of the line. But on the right is the now contemporary product photography that we've done for the thin edge bed, because we're selling it again. And same goes with the day bed. But then also when we're going to market with these things and trying to get press, they will come to me and ask for photography of George Nelson, of the bed when it came out, and then that will get put into press releases and then published again. So it's fun that this stuff can have a life beyond that. And then kind of the biggest project I've worked on since I've started at Herman Miller is this book. It's a monograph that is the history of the company in a way that it's never been told before. Not only did we comb through our own archives, but we went to the Library of Congress, Vitra Design Museum, UCLA, MoMA, Cooper Hewitt, beyond. We basically went around the world to try to find as much Herman Miller adjacent material as we could. A lot of it comes from the archives, but within each chapter, there are 10 chapters, and they're based around these different impact moments that we called them in Herman Miller history. So, for example, chapter 1 is about Gilbert Rohde, who is a designer who came to Herman Miller in the early 30s and convinced us to start manufacturing modern furniture. Another chapter is about George Nelson coming to the company, Eames's. But within each of those chapters, we sort of wanted to tell mini histories or give context. So this isn't a chapter about sort of our graphic design, but this spread is talking about how after we developed the logo in 1946, all of the many applications that it immediately took on. So we're using it both in showrooms, but also in advertisements as well. It's also a chance to put a lot of this graphic design within context. So these were designed around the same time, but by all different designers in the Nelson office. There's also a lot of primary source material in the book. So on the left, it's an essay by Alexander Girard called Good Design versus Style, and it was printed in a publication called Furniture Forum, which is really hard to find. Like, I had to go to a crazy library to find this and transcribe it and photograph it. But it's a really nice essay and sort of look at how Girard was thinking about design on his own. All to say, it's really hard to get access to this stuff, so this is a chance to reprint things so that you could sort of have everything all in one place. We also talk about, it's not only a history book, but we talk about how it informs how the company operates today. So these are images from our New York City showroom that when we embarked on this project, our 3D designers, our interiors people, came to the archives, wanted to understand how people like George Nelson, Alexander Girard were designing showrooms then, and what elements could they bring into the space now that were good and that worked. So all to say, it's something we very much still reference. A little bit about the process. I mentioned we went to the Library of Congress. I got to get a Library of Congress library card, which was really cool. And then the way that the Eames, so Charles and Ray Eames, after they closed their office in California, donated the majority of their photography and working archive to the library, and it's split between a manuscripts division, which you see on the left, and photography. So in the manuscripts division, you have stuff from their office like assembly instructions for these new bases for the fiberglass chairs that they would then send this on to Herman Miller, and stuff like this would get incorporated to our marketing material. You also get kind of glimpses at Ray Eames's process. So this is a little piece of paper where she's kind of laying out ideas for an invitation to Herman Miller's LA showroom. And you get a sense of her typography, but then also she's great with color. And I like seeing this example of her just picking things. And then this eventually got turned into an invitation. There's also, the Eameses kept press about themselves, of course. But I loved this one because it says at the bottom, well, first of all, Saul Steinberg was an illustrator for The New Yorker and a friend of the Eameses, and he came by one afternoon, saw the new fiberglass chairs that they were working on, and did some illustrations on them. And then the Eameses showed these in some exhibitions, and the caption for this is, "Want sitting nude kicked out of show. Controversy over drawing on plastic chair. Is it vulgar or is it art?" So I just like that they would keep this about themselves. Kind of a level of ridiculousness in terms of what got kept, but Ray Eames had a huge decorative paper collection, and I literally was sitting in a reading room in the library, opened up a folder, and it was just scraps of paper that initially, like, what is all this paper just doing here? But look at it a little longer, and you're like, oh, this is her like working out color for something, and of course all of this looks very lovely together, but I love, you know, she dies, they're cleaning out her stuff, and they're like, yeah, let's keep these pieces of paper together, and it gets its own folder and gets cataloged at America's best library. In the photography collection, so we wanted to include as much color photography as possible, so a lot of what was in Herman Miller's own archive were black and white prints. The Eameses have a huge slide collection, so again, like, I feel like they would have been those annoying people on Instagram that were sharing too much because they were always shooting. And so they have this slide collection that numbers in the hundreds of thousands that thankfully is organized in a way that kind of makes sense. So the Herman Miller projects are in one place, but then they have a friends section, and this is just a nice image of Ray sitting at her house, probably in the 80s, in Pacific Palisades, kind of looking out, but it's color. And I think that might be it. And that's it. So just a little bit about the book, what I do, and yeah, thanks for coming.